The desolate prairie winds whispered a harsh truth. She had crossed a continent for a promise, only to find an empty hearth, a missing groom, and 7 hungry, pale faces staring back. This wasn't a marriage. It was a reckoning. But before we immerse ourselves in this tale of unexpected motherhood and unyielding spirit, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The dust of the journey clung to her elk-hide moccasins, a fine ochre powder that coated the very breath she drew. Days bled into weeks, weeks into the endless expanse of a land that devoured hope as readily as it did sunlight. She had come from a place where the earth spoke in ancient tongues, where the spirits of her ancestors watched over every sunrise, to this desolate outpost, a speck on a canvas of unforgiving emptiness. The crude, leaning cabin, its chimney barren of smoke, was not the beacon of a new beginning she had been promised. Its silence was a shriek, a void that swallowed the remnants of her weary optimism. She stepped onto the porch, the worn planks groaning beneath her weight, a prelude to the breaking of her own spirit. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the scent of unwashed wool, stale bread, and something else, a subtle, sour tang of neglect. Her eyes, accustomed to the wide, sun-drenched plains, struggled to pierce the gloom within the single large room. Furniture, sparse and crudely made, huddled like frightened shadows. And then, the rustling. A small, tentative movement from a pile of rags in the corner. Her hand instinctively went to the bone knife, tucked into her belt, a legacy from her father, a silent guardian in this alien world. The rustling grew, multiplying, until small, pale faces emerged from the dimness, like startled owls from a hollow tree. 7 pairs of eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed upon her. 7 children. Her gaze swept the room again, desperately searching for the man who had sent the letters, the stranger whose carefully penned words had spun a fragile tapestry of a shared future. There was no man, only the ghosts of his absence, and these 7 fragile, starving beings who seemed to hold the weight of a forgotten world in their gaunt frames. The silence stretched, brittle and sharp, punctuated only by the shallow, rapid breaths of the children, and the thunderous beat of her own bewildered heart. This was not the life she had envisioned. This was not the peace she had sought. This was a trap, woven of desperation and deceit, and she, a solitary warrior, had walked directly into its gaping maw. The warmth of the sun, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a taunt, mocking her misplaced trust beneath a sky that stretched boundless and indifferent. Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of betrayal and a stark, primal fear she hadn't known since childhood. She was a Lakota woman, steeped in the traditions of her people, trained to read the land, to understand the subtle shifts in wind and water. Yet, here, she was utterly lost, a foreign body in a foreign land, confronted by a mystery more perplexing than any natural phenomenon. The children, ranging in age from a mere babe clutched by a solemn-faced girl no older than 10, to a lanky boy with eyes too old for his years, clung to each other like a desperate cluster of wildflowers in a harsh wind. Their silence was deafening, a testament to hardship she could only begin to imagine. They were white, their skin a stark contrast to her own sun-kissed copper, their hair a multitude of pale shades, from flaxen to mousy brown. A gulf, wider than the plains she had crossed, opened between them, not just of race, but of circumstance, of understanding, of shared humanity. Who was this man, this phantom husband, who would abandon such a vulnerable brood? The question hung in the stale air, unanswered, heavy with malevolence. A flicker of anger, cold and sharp, ignited within her. Anger at him, for his monstrous deceit. Anger at herself, for her naive belief in his promises. Anger at the sheer, bewildering unfairness of it all. This was not a test of her spirit. It was an ambush. She had come seeking a quiet life, perhaps a family of her own, a haven from the encroaching shadows on her ancestral lands, and instead found herself tethered to a crucible of another's making. The smallest child whimpered, a fragile sound that broke the spell. It was a sound that transcended race, transcended expectation, a universal cry of hunger and neglect. Her gaze softened imperceptibly, from the harsh assessment of a strategist to the dawning recognition of pure, unadulterated need. Her stomach, long accustomed to the sparseness of her journey, clenched in sympathy. These children, they were not the enemy. They were merely victims, much like herself, caught in the wake of a selfish man's abandonment. The thought was a bitter pill, difficult to swallow. She had to decide, then and there, whether to flee, to retreat into the boundless horizon, or to face this unexpected storm. The choice was a stark, brutal one, tearing at the fabric of her resolve. The sun, a distant memory, began its descent, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple, mirroring the turmoil within her soul. The first few days were a blur of primal needs and unspoken hostilities. She, the unexpected sentinel, found herself a reluctant warden in this desolate orphanage. Food was scarce, the larder almost bare save for a sack of hardened cornmeal and a few shriveled potatoes. The water pail, blessedly, was still half full, though the taste was brackish, tasting of distant dust. The children watched her with wary, intelligent eyes, like wild animals cornered but still ready to bolt. The oldest boy, perhaps 12, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a face etched with a premature weariness, held himself apart, a self-appointed protector of the younger ones. He seemed to resent her very presence, his silent defiance a palpable challenge. She understood. She was an intruder, a stranger, and to his young, traumatized mind, likely another source of potential abandonment or harm. She moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the cold embers in the hearth, seeking out what meager provisions might remain. The silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the crackle of the hesitant fire and the occasional whimper from the infant. She tried to communicate, simple gestures, a few halting English words she knew from trading posts, but their comprehension seemed limited, their trust non-existent. A pang of something akin to resentment, sharp and undeniable, pierced her resolve. This was not her burden. She had left her own people, her own struggles, seeking a different life, only to find herself shackled to a family she never chose, their survival suddenly contingent on her foreign hands. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She, a Lakota woman, was now responsible for 7 white children, in a land that often saw her kind as nothing more than savages. The weight of societal expectation, though unspoken in this lonely cabin, pressed down upon her. She was acutely aware of the racial divide, the deep chasm of mistrust and prejudice that separated their worlds. Would any white settler accept this arrangement? Would she be seen as a rescuer or a threat? The unanswered questions gnawed at her, adding another layer of tension to the already strained atmosphere. The wind outside howled, a mournful lament that seemed to echo her own internal turmoil. She was a woman adrift, caught in a current of unexpected fate, with no compass to guide her, only the desperate, hungry eyes of 7 children urging her forward. It had been a desperate choice, the kind carved from the bone-deep ache of watching her world shrink, piece by painful piece. Her village, once vibrant, now felt haunted by the specter of change. The white man's forts encroached, their iron tracks scarring the sacred lands, their promises dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Her people, proud and unyielding, found themselves caught in a tightening noose of treaties broken and traditions eroded. The hunt grew leaner each season, the buffalo herds dwindling, their thundering hooves now a fading memory. She had watched young men, her kin, lured away by the glittering trinkets and empty words of the settlers, only to return broken, or not at all. Hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed under the boots of progress. Then came the offer, delivered by a dusty trader, a gaunt man whose eyes held the weariness of too many journeys. A man, a settler in the distant territories, sought a wife, a woman of strong spirit, of resilience. He spoke of land, of a quiet life, of a home built on the edge of the wilderness, far from the choking dust of the changing world. The idea was a seed, planted in barren ground, slowly taking root. It was not a yearning for love, not a romantic dream, but a desperate grasp at survival, a hope for a future unmarred by the encroaching shadows, a chance to forge a new path, perhaps even to bridge the chasm between 2 warring worlds. The letters, when they came, were sparse, formal, but spoke of a need for companionship, a desire for a partner to build a life with. He did not mention children. Not a single word. The deception was a cruel twist of the knife, plunging deep into her carefully constructed walls of stoicism. She had packed her few belongings: her grandmother's beaded pouch, a dried root for medicine, her bone knife, and a heart hardened by farewells, yet still open to the faint possibility of a new beginning. She had bid farewell to the whispers of her ancestors, to the familiar scent of wood smoke and sage, to the comforting rhythm of her people's drums. The journey itself had been a pilgrimage, each mile a silent prayer for a different destiny. Now, standing amidst the desolation of this cabin, the truth of his monstrous lie unfurled like a poisoned banner. He had needed a mother, not a wife, a caregiver for his abandoned brood, a silent workhorse to shoulder his responsibilities. The mystery of his absence, the truth of his betrayal, resonated with the quiet despair of her own people's plight. This was the cost of trusting the promises of a world that sought only to consume. The quiet resentment simmered within her, a constant, low fire beneath the surface of her new, unwanted reality. Each day was a battle, a small victory won against hunger, dirt, and the crushing weight of responsibility. She cleaned the cabin, scrubbed the children's faces until they shone, and found forgotten stores of dried beans and salt pork that hinted at a frantic, hurried departure. The oldest boy, Thomas, remained a stoic sentinel, his dark eyes shadowed by a wisdom far beyond his years. He was the one who seemed to understand the gravity of their situation, the precariousness of their existence. The younger ones, though still wary, began to tentatively approach her, their hunger for comfort outweighing their initial fear. A small hand might brush against her skirt, a timid glance would meet hers across the flickering lamplight. She responded with an impassive calm, never softening completely, never fully allowing herself to surrender to the warmth that threatened to breach her defenses. This was not a maternal instinct, she told herself, but a pragmatic recognition of necessity. Their survival was intrinsically linked to hers. If they perished, she would be alone, utterly alone, in this vast, indifferent land. Her thoughts often drifted to escape. The boundless horizon beckoned, a silent promise of freedom. She could slip away in the night, leave them to their fate, a fate they were destined for anyway, given their father's cruel abandonment. No one would know, no one would care. The urge was a powerful current, pulling at her, a testament to her morally ambiguous struggle. But then, the image of the smallest one, the babe, held constantly by the 10-year-old girl, would flicker in her mind. So small, so utterly helpless. The shame of such an act, though it would be unseen, would burn within her, a brand on her soul. This was the burden of her own flawed humanity, the quiet voice that spoke of responsibility even when every fiber of her being screamed for release. She began to teach them, not words, but the small, quiet lessons of survival. How to mend torn clothes with a needle and thread, how to gather meager wild greens, how to distinguish between the edible and the poisonous. Their young minds, pliable and eager, absorbed these lessons with a surprising alacrity. The tension in the cabin eased, not vanished, but softened, like a taut string gradually relaxing its grip. She was not their mother, not yet, but she was becoming something else, something unspoken, a reluctant anchor in their storm-tossed lives. The silence that had initially been a barrier slowly began to transform, becoming a quiet, comfortable hum, punctuated by the small sounds of living. The cabin, once cold and empty, started to breathe with the rhythm of 7 young lives. There were still moments, however, when the chasm between them felt immense. One afternoon, a small child, a girl with hair the color of corn silk, approached her with a crude doll fashioned from rags. She offered it shyly, a gesture of unspoken trust. The woman accepted it, her fingers tracing the worn fabric, and for a fleeting moment, a warmth, unfamiliar and startling, bloomed in her chest. It was a fragile connection, a single thread attempting to bridge the vast cultural divide that separated them. Thomas, the oldest boy, remained aloof, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, a mirror of her own unspoken vigilance. He rarely spoke, but his actions spoke volumes, always ensuring the younger ones were fed first, always watching her with a keen, assessing gaze. He was testing her, she knew, weighing her against the crushing disappointments of his past. Her presence in their lives was a disruption, an anomaly that threatened to unravel the fragile peace they had painstakingly built. The external world, however, was closing in. Whispers, carried on the wind from the distant trading post, began to reach them. Stories of a wild woman living with a brood of white children, of a Lakota woman in a white man's cabin. The prejudice, latent yet ever-present, began to fester. One blistering afternoon, a lone rider, a grizzled trapper known for his harsh words and harsher deeds, rode up to the cabin. He dismounted, his shadow falling long and ominous across the doorway. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over her, then lingered on the pale faces of the children clustered behind her. "What devilry is this?" he rasped, his voice thick with suspicion and malice. "A red woman and white children? Where's their father, woman?" The question hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed straight at the heart of their precarious existence. Her hand instinctively went to her knife, her stance defensive. The children, sensing the shift in the air, huddled closer, their small breaths catching in their throats. The fragile bond she had painstakingly woven with them, born of necessity and quiet endurance, was now put to its first true test against the crushing weight of the outside world's judgment. This was not merely about survival anymore. It was about protecting what inexplicably had begun to feel like her own. The confrontation with the trapper was a chilling harbinger of the storm gathering on the horizon. His sneering accusation, the glint of suspicion in his eyes, solidified the unspoken threat. They were an anomaly, a strange, unnatural family in a world that craved order and conformity. The children, still reeling from the encounter, looked to her with a new kind of fear in their eyes, a fear that transcended hunger or abandonment. It was the fear of the unknown, of a world that would not understand, would not accept. In the tense silence that followed his departure, Thomas, the oldest boy, finally spoke, his voice hoarse with a mixture of anger and despair. He said, "Our father was gone, that he ain't coming back." The words, though expected, hit her with the force of a physical blow. The mystery of the absent husband, the open wound that had festered since her arrival, was finally laid bare. The trapper, in his crude malice, had unknowingly revealed the truth. The man who had lured her here with promises of a future, the man who had abandoned his own flesh and blood, was gone, perhaps dead, perhaps fled to parts unknown. His deception was absolute. The realization, brutal and unyielding, slammed into her. There was no husband. There was no man to shoulder the burden. There was only her, a Lakota woman, and these 7 pale-faced children, utterly orphaned, utterly reliant on her. The last vestiges of her resentment began to dissipate, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of responsibility. It was no longer about her lost promise, her stolen future. It was about their survival. The children, sensing the finality in Thomas's words, began to whimper, small, mournful sounds that echoed the desolate wind outside. The smallest child, the babe, began to cry, a piercing wail that ripped through the cabin's fragile peace. The little girl who always held him rocked him gently, her own face streaked with tears. Their desperation, raw and unfiltered, hung heavy in the air. This was the moment of truth, the final reckoning. She could still walk away, disappear into the vastness of the prairie, leaving them to the mercy of a harsh and unforgiving world. Or she could embrace the impossible. The decision, though made in the silence of her heart, was louder than any battle cry. She was no longer just a woman seeking a path. She was their last hope, their only shield against the indifferent forces that sought to crush them. The choice was not born of love, not yet, but of a grim, unyielding determination to protect the vulnerable, to stand as a bulwark against a cruel fate. The crying of the infant swelled, a raw, elemental sound that clawed at the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart. It was a cry not just of hunger or discomfort, but of profound, uncomprehending loss. The little girl, Sarah, who held him, looked up at her, her eyes wide pools of terror and pleading. In that moment, the racial divide, the cultural chasm, the bitterness of betrayal, all of it dissolved. There was only raw, desperate humanity. She moved without conscious thought, her hands reaching out, gently taking the small, squalling bundle from Sarah's trembling arms. The babe was feather-light, his tiny body radiating the heat of fear and distress. She held him close, instinctively rocking him, murmuring soft, melodic words in her own language, words of comfort and ancient lullabies passed down through generations. He quieted, slowly, his small hand clenching around her finger, his wide, tear-filled eyes fixing on her face. A gasp of air, sharp and involuntary, escaped her lips. This was it. This was the pivotal emotional climax, the point of no return. Her breath hitched. The fear that had always been a shadow, the resentment, a cold ember, was suddenly extinguished, replaced by a fierce, protective fire that ignited deep within her. These were not the children of a stranger, not merely a burden. They were her children, not of her blood, not of her tribe, but woven into the very fabric of her being by the sheer force of their need and her unexpected, unyielding resolve. Thomas, watching her, his young face a mask of awe, took a hesitant step forward. The other children, sensing the profound shift in the air, slowly emerged from their huddle. The cabin, once filled with the ghosts of abandonment, now thrummed with a new, potent energy. The darkness that had clung to the corners began to recede, replaced by a tentative light. She looked at each of them, her gaze unwavering, seeing not their pale skin, not their foreignness, but their vulnerability, their nascent hope, her own flaws, her initial ambiguity, her struggles with resentment. They were still there, perhaps, but now overshadowed by a powerful, undeniable force: motherhood. It was a choice born of desperation, yes, but now solidified by something akin to fierce, unconditional love. The world outside could judge, could accuse, could threaten. It did not matter. She would stand. She would fight. She would provide. This was her new path, etched not in the dust, but in the depths of her soul. The sun, that cruel mistress of the plains, began its slow descent, painting the cabin in hues of deepening red and purple, a silent witness to the profound transformation within. She held the babe close, his small body a warm, trusting weight against her chest. The quiet sobs of the older children subsided, replaced by the soft sounds of breathing, a new, tentative peace settling over the room. Thomas, his eyes still wide with a mix of awe and burgeoning hope, approached her. He did not speak, but his gaze, direct and questioning, sought answers. She met his eyes, a silent promise passing between them. The fragile bond, tested and strengthened, was now forged into something resilient, unbreakable. The days that followed were not without struggle. The world outside remained a formidable adversary, its judgment a constant, unseen pressure. The trapper, in his ignorance, had unwittingly spread the tale, and the occasional rider who passed by the cabin offered cold, suspicious glances. But inside, a new kind of life began to blossom. She taught them to forage for wild berries and edible roots, to track small game, to read the signs of the weather in the subtle shifts of the wind. She taught them patience, resilience, and the quiet dignity of survival. The smallest child, whom she now called Little Wren in her heart, began to thrive under her gentle, unwavering care. His smiles were like tiny bursts of sunshine, illuminating the darkest corners of the cabin. Sarah, the 10-year-old, became her shadow, absorbing every lesson, mimicking her movements with a quiet intensity. The other children, once timid and withdrawn, began to play, their laughter, tentative at first, slowly growing in volume, a joyous symphony that filled the cabin with the sound of renewed life. Their pale skin, once a barrier, faded from her consciousness, replaced by the individual expressions of their unique spirits. She saw the fierce loyalty in Thomas, the gentle kindness in Sarah, the mischievous spark in young James. They were not just children, they were a burgeoning constellation, each shining with their own small light, orbiting around her unexpected center. The prejudice of the outside world was a constant, looming threat, a shadow on the periphery of their fragile world. But within the walls of their cabin, insulated by the warmth of their newfound family, it held less power. She was their mother now, not by blood, but by an unwavering choice, a fierce commitment forged in the crucible of abandonment and desperate need. Their survival, once an obligation, had become her purpose, a silent testament to the boundless capacity of the human heart. Years folded into each other, like the slow, deliberate turning of the seasons, each bringing new challenges, new triumphs. The little cabin, once a symbol of abandonment, became a fortress of resilience, its walls echoing with laughter and the quiet industry of a family forged in the crucible of adversity. The children grew, their faces shedding the gauntness of hunger, their eyes reflecting the steady, unwavering strength they had found in their unexpected mother. Thomas, the oldest, matured into a young man of quiet resolve, his protective instinct blossoming into a fierce loyalty. He learned to hunt with her, to track the deer and the rabbit, his movements mirroring her own, fluid and silent. Sarah, the gentle one, became her steadfast companion, learning the ancient ways of healing herbs, her small hands as deft as her mother's. The other children, each in their own way, absorbed the lessons of the land, the rhythm of survival, and the unspoken language of love that permeated their home. Their white skin, once a stark reminder of their difference, had long ceased to matter. They were hers. She was theirs. The world outside continued to churn with its prejudices, its judgments, its ceaseless demands. Occasionally, a stranger would pass, their gaze lingering, filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. But their stares held less power now. The family unit, unconventional and fiercely independent, had learned to weather the storms, both natural and societal. The whispers of the wild woman and her white children faded into legend, replaced by the quiet acknowledgement of their enduring presence, their unwavering resilience. She carried the scars of her past, the memories of betrayal, the quiet ache for her own people and the land she had left behind. But these were no longer open wounds. They were ancient marks, reminders of the journey that had led her to this improbable destiny. The land, once barren and hostile, had become her home, its rhythms now deeply etched into her soul. She taught the children to respect it, to listen to its whispers, to understand its generous yet often unforgiving nature. They learned the names of the stars in 2 languages, the wisdom of the animals, the profound interconnectedness of all living things. One crisp autumn evening, as the first stars began to prick holes in the vast canvas of the sky, she sat by the crackling fire, the sounds of her children's contented slumber filling the small cabin. Thomas, now a young man, sat beside her, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. The firelight danced on his face, illuminating the strength etched there. "Mother," he began, his voice soft, hesitant, using the word that had once been a foreign sound, now a cherished truth. "Why did you stay?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken curiosity, a profound query that spoke to the very heart of their unusual family. She looked into the embers, the flames reflecting in her eyes, a silent movie of her past playing out within their depths. The anger, the fear, the confusion of that desolate first day, the bitter taste of betrayal, the moral ambiguity of her own desire to flee, the desperate choice, not of love, but of necessity. And then, the slow, imperceptible shift, the dawning recognition of their fragile humanity, the fierce, protective surge that had ultimately bound her to them. "The winds," she murmured, her voice a low, melodic hum. "They brought me here. They stripped away all I thought I knew, all I expected. They showed me a void, and then they showed me a need." Her gaze drifted to the sleeping forms of the younger children, nestled close like a clutch of fledglings. "You were hungry. You were lost. And I was alone. We found each other in the wilderness, like 2 separate rivers, forced to converge." It wasn't a poetic explanation, but a grounded truth, a testament to the raw, unvarnished reality of their beginnings. The silence settled again, comfortable, profound. It was the silence of understanding, of a shared history forged in hardship and unexpected grace. She was a Lakota woman, yes, and she carried the wisdom of her ancestors within her. But she was also a mother, a protector, a builder of a new kind of family, one born not of blood, but of an unyielding spirit and a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of soils. The years had etched lines of wisdom around her eyes, but also a profound serenity that spoke of battles fought and inner peace found. The children, now grown, carried pieces of her within them. Thomas, the quiet strength and connection to the land. Sarah, the gentle hand of healing and the quiet wisdom. The younger ones, the resilience and adaptability she had instilled. They were a testament to the boundless capacity of the human heart, a vibrant, living answer to the question of what constitutes family. The prairie, once a desolate expanse, now held the echoes of their shared laughter, the quiet rhythm of their enduring love. She watched them, her heart swelling with an emotion too profound for words, a complex tapestry of joy, pride, and the quiet ache of a journey completed. The darkness of her arrival, the tension of the unknown, the bitter sting of betrayal all had receded, replaced by the hopeful resolution that now illuminated their lives. She had arrived a stranger, a mail-order bride seeking a promise, only to find herself faced with the monstrous void of abandonment and the daunting reality of 7 abandoned children. But through necessity, through unwavering resolve, and through the slow, tender blossoming of an unexpected love, she had become something more. She had become their mother. And in doing so, she had not only saved them, but had also, perhaps, saved a piece of herself, forging a new identity in the crucible of their shared existence. Their story, whispered on the wind, became a quiet legend of resilience, a testament to the truth that family is not always born of blood, but sometimes, against all odds, forged in the crucible of unexpected need, an unyielding spirit, and the boundless capacity of the human heart to embrace the most improbable of destinies. The sun, a familiar friend, dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with a last, fiery embrace, a silent benediction over the unconventional family she had built, a testament to the enduring power of spirit, and the profound, transformative journey from being a stranger to becoming a mother.